Hi everyone, welcome back to Coding 101, and in this video I'm going to continue talking about functions. So in the previous video we talked about functions and we discussed basically how to create a function, and we discussed different ways in which we want to construct arguments. So two of the ways we discussed was the arbitrary argument and the keyword argument here. So what I'm going to talk about in this video is the arbitrary keyword argument, and as the name suggests, it is actually a hybrid of the two. So I'm just going to create a new function and I'm going to call it Copa Cabana. So I'm going to put in the arguments. Instead of 1 star, I'm going to put 2 stars here, and I'm going to name the arguments there args, and in the code block I'm going to say for key and value in args, and I'm going to say items. I'm going to put a if statement here, and I'm going to check if key equals name. I'm going to run print her name was, I'm just going to put value here, and I'm going to put a second if statement, and this time I'm going to check for the key that equals to occupation, and I'm going to say she was a value there. Okay, so we've created this function, and we've created a function that uses this arbitrary keyword argument. So if you look at the for loop, it looks like we're looping through a dictionary, because when we use this arbitrary keyword argument, it treats the argument like a dictionary. So you might think that if we want to execute this function here, we need to put a dictionary, but we actually don't need to. How we call this function is basically, when we're calling this function, we can basically do it the same way that we do it with keyword arguments. So we can put name, and we can say Lola. I'm going to capitalize that, and I'm going to put occupation. I'm going to put showgirl. So if we run this, and it outputs her name was Lola, she was a showgirl. So basically it treats it like a dictionary. It looks for the key name in the args here, arguments, and it will execute this print statement, and if the key is occupation, it will print this statement here. So what you've actually done is created optional arguments. So if you remove the name argument here, it will still run, but it will only execute the second print statement, and you can also remove both values here, and it will run, but it will not give you any output. So those are how you use arbitrary keyword arguments and create sort of an optional argument. You can also outright create a required argument. So I'm just going to print args, and I'm going to say required. So it treats it like a dictionary. So if you run this code with no arguments, what it does is it says key error required, because in arguments there is no key called required, because you need to provide a value for it. So if you provide the required argument here, and I'm going to just put a random number, then the function will run just fine. So if you know that a function needs this value here, you don't have to put a check here. But if you know your function has an optional argument, and based on the optional argument you will run different code, you will have to check if that argument has that key and then execute it. So that's the arbitrary keyword argument. So the next thing I want to talk about is default argument. So I'm going to take a look back at this hello function. I'm going to change this back to name, and I'm going to remove the for loop, and I'm going to say print hello name, and I'm going to call this function with no arguments, and as you know, it will actually give you an error because it says missing one required positional argument. So the way to avoid this is to provide a default value for this argument, and the way you can do it is you can just put equal and you can put the value you want. So you can put name equal Mary, and if you run it, you will say hello Mary, and it will always have the value of Mary. The name argument will always have the value of Mary if you do not provide a value in the function. So that's a default value here. So the last thing I want to talk about with functions, at least in this video, is what we call a return statement. So just imagine if you want to basically perform sort of multiple operations from the arguments here. So I'm just going to create a function called random operations, and this function will take two arguments, A and B, and I'm just going to put some random values here. I'm just going to say C equal A plus B, C equals A multiplied by B divided by C, and then I'm going to do A equals, or C equals A divided by B to the power of C. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to call this function here, and I'm going to print. You can actually print functions. So print a call of a function, and if I run this requirements, oh, okay, so I have to put in arguments. I'm just going to put where 13 and 56. So I'm going to run that, and it says none here because when you call this function here, the function will not give you a value. So if you want to perform certain random operations and you want to get the value of these operations, so you want to get the final value of C here, you need to put a return statement. So it just basically is you just use the return keyword and say return C. Just gonna space that out, and if you print this, you will actually get the value. So if you call this function, it will return the value of all these operations, and you can also store that value into another variable here. So I'm just going to call it out. I'm going to print out, and there you go. You have basically created a function with inputs, and then it will give you an output value here, and you can actually store in the value. So that is the return statement. So okay, so we've gone through two different extra arguments here, the arbitrary keyword argument and the default argument here, and we also talked about return statements. So I'm going to actually end this video here. We're not done with functions just yet, so in the next video I'm going to be talking about a concept called recursions. So I will see you guys in the next video. So I'll see you guys then. Goodbye.